Friends, as you all know, managing risks effectively at our work sites is an essential element of our risk management program. It is not only a moral responsibility, but also a legal obligation for us. Let us look at some of our incidents and try to understand what went wrong in managing risks at our work sites. Excavation collapse. 2 employees were using jackhammer for carrying out manual excavation inside the trench to increase the depth. Due to vibration and loose soil condition, part of the loose soil collapsed and injured the employees. One employee suffered pelvic fracture as he was hit on his back with a big lump of soil, and the other suffered contusion on his right knee. Let's look at another incident. High pressure water jet cutting incident. A specialist subcontractor crew was engaged in cutting annular plate of the tank using high pressure water jet cutting system. While cutting was in progress, the nozzle assembly, along with the guide rail, detached from the shell and flew towards the technicians standing nearby. As the technician panicked and fell on his crew member, the high pressure water jet hit on his back, causing cut injury. The fall resulted in minor fracture of 3rd, 4th and 5th ribs of the technician. Our last incident is a line of fire incident. A mechanical crew was working on installation of a grating step on the crossover walkway. The crew decided to use a wooden log and the hydraulic jack to create space for installation of the step. When the crew started applying force using the jack, the wooden log broke and one piece hit the employee on upper lip, causing laceration injury. In STS, it is mandatory to carry out proper risk assessment before commencing any activity. As most of our tasks are of repetitive nature, you may always find a risk assessment document available with your supervisor or HSE advisor. However, please remember that in an evolving work environment, you cannot fully rely on the risk assessment done earlier by someone on a different job or work location. To make the risk assessment relevant to your job, you need to review and validate it against site-specific hazards. This needs to be done prior to commencing any activity. This process will help you to address all relevant hazards, like specific worksite conditions, changes in tools or equipment, conflicting activities, etc. Investigations of our past incidents revealed that some of the key hazards were missed out due to use of generic risk assessments. Supervisors and permit holders are responsible for validating risk assessments in their work locations. You have to do new risk assessments whenever you plan to do any new task or make considerable changes to existing process or procedure. Assessments should be done by a competent person or group of individuals who have a good working knowledge of the activity. A risk assessment is not about creating huge amounts of paperwork, but rather about identifying all hazards and suitable measures to control the risks in our workplace. Employee involvement is must in any meaningful risk assessment. Involve your employees. It is very important to involve your employees in the hazard identification process. They have a unique understanding of the job, and this knowledge is invaluable for identifying hazards. As a minimum, we need to follow the basic 5 steps for risk assessment. Identify the hazards. One of the most important aspects of our risk assessment is accurately identifying the potential hazards related to your activity. A good starting point is to walk around your work site and look for potential hazards. This can also be done by breaking the activity into various tasks and identifying the hazards that could injure our workforce or damage the assets. While carrying out this step, it is recommended to pay attention to learning from incident related to the job, pay attention to non-routine jobs, manufacturer's instructions for equipment. Who might be harmed? Think who might be harmed and how it can be avoided. For each hazard, you need to be clear about who might be harmed. It will help you identify the best way of controlling the risk. If you share a workplace, consider how your work affects others and how others' work affects your team. In such case, you must talk to each other and make sure adequate controls like SIMOPS are in place. Evaluate the risks and establish controls. Having identified the hazards, you then have to decide how likely the harm will occur and what to do about it. While establishing controls, we follow this hierarchy. While moving from top to bottom, the effectiveness of controls diminishes. It's important to remember that multiple controls are always required to ensure safe and incident-free operations. Following this hierarchy leads to the implementation of inherently safer systems, where the risk of illness or injury has been substantially reduced. Identify legal and client requirements. It is also important to refer to the relevant procedures and local regulations to identify any specific legal or client requirements applicable for the task. They also need to be captured in your risk assessment. Record your findings. Make a record of your significant findings, the hazards, how people might be harmed or assets damaged, and what you have in place to control the risks. Use any acceptable formats for recording the risk assessments. Once the risk assessment is done, it's important to get this reviewed by HSE and approved by management. Regularly review your risk assessment. Every worksite is different, even in same location. Activities planned on different days pose different challenges. Many times you may use different equipment, material and procedures that could lead to new hazards. So it makes sense to review what you are doing on an ongoing basis. Make sure your risk assessment stays up to date. Risk communication is the most important aspect of risk management process. Toolbox talks are the most effective one. STS expects every supervisor or permit holder to conduct a two-way interactive toolbox talk. The key to any toolbox talk is to get the audience participating. They need to have better understanding of the hazards and risks associated with the activity planned for that day. Also need to know identified controls and emergency response. Ensuring controls are fully implemented. This is the most critical part of managing risks. Unless responsible persons like permit holder, supervisor, engineer, or even a site manager for high-risk activity are not ensuring that the identified controls are fully implemented, the whole exercise stands futile, and we end up exposing our employees and assets. So make sure that this part is not at all compromised. Any change of situation during progress of work that alters the risk should be addressed through dynamic risk review or management change process. Please note, in STS it is forbidden to do any task without conducting an appropriate risk assessment. We can always save lives and prevent asset damages if we do our job responsibly.